Okay, so a little bit about me. As Jin mentioned, this is my fourth company that I'm building, CubeGrade. I'm originally from France. I went to study in Canada and spent 12 years in Canada. And I built two businesses out of Canada, but I didn't start out as a startup founder. So my first two businesses, Stinson and Candy Digital, they were more like productized agencies than startups. I was always passionate about startups, and I tried a lot of different things during sort of this journey of building Stinson and Candy Digital that led me to Tendo. But I had a lot of failures, and you know, if you're at the early stages of your startup journey, I've been there. So what I'm trying to say is that, I'll try to give you some relatable insights and try to share some of the learnings I've had along the journey. But to give you a bit of background, so Stinson Design originally was a product or a service company that I built to provide cash flow for a startup idea, which was an online betting tool for events happening in the world. And now this is something that's obviously taken off and someone else has built it really, really well. But I had built this presentation design agency just to cash flow. But it turned out that this presentation agency just took off and became really, really big. And it took up all of my time. And I decided to, cancel my plans of building a startup at the time and just build an agency. But that opened up the door to, understanding the whole world of productized services and how bringing technology to existing services was extremely efficient. You could sort of scale it fast. You could make it really profitable. And so I decided to build another one and at the same time exit the first one. Candid Digital was more of an ad tech productized service. We were servicing ad agencies in North America. And I realized that I would be able to arbitrage the cost of human capital in Southeast Asia and service North America and charge North American prices. And that was my first step into Southeast Asia. I started building a team in the Philippines of animators, front-end developers, and designers who were all really talented, spoke perfect English, and I really enjoyed traveling there. And so during this stint at Candy Digital, I grew a team of 35 people in Manila, and I was traveling back and forth constantly. And as I was doing that, I realized there was a lot of opportunities in Southeast Asia. I had never really been there. I didn't know much about it, but as I, kept traveling there, I realized, you know, they were behind on a lot of things, but accelerating very, very fast. And so I was sharing offices with this guy called Casper at the time. And as I was sort of, getting to maturity with Candy Digital, we had grown to several $1 million in annual revenue, and we were just not excited about the product anymore. My co-founder and I, Jan, uh, Casper mentioned that there was an idea for him to build a buy now pay later in the Philippines, and this came at a perfect time for us because we wanted to sort of exit the business and build something else. And Southeast Asia just seemed so appealing, so we decided to build a company called TendoPay in the Philippines. And the idea was just to copy a Klarna and Affirm and Afterpay, but for the Filipino market. And I'll spare you the details, but we went through a lot of different pivots. We actually got in the iterative program. We were actually in the first ever batch of iterative probably 5 years ago. And that was a really cool experience. But eventually we pivoted and found product market fit in salary loans, which were essentially us partnering up with large employers in the Philippines and offering loans as a employee benefit, allowing employers to sort of retain and engage their employees. But for us, it was a way to, reduce the risk on providing these loans by collecting repayments via salary deductions. And so that gained a lot of traction, and we were able to scale it quite fast. And through that growth, we were acquired by Tonic Bank, who was seeking for a way to lend out their balance sheet because they were a new neobank and they were growing really fast in terms of deposits, but they didn't have any way to deploy that capital. And so it was a perfect fit, and that's why the transaction happened relatively quickly. So that was my third exit. But during that time at TendoPay is when I really found the power of content-led sales. And the reason was as I mentioned, I was a big fan of automating LinkedIn and email campaigns and customizing them and all that. But I realized that that was slowly dying off, and it wasn't necessarily just the market conditions in the Philippines. It was worldwide. All my friends were seeing this trend, and so I had to reinvent the way we were doing sales. And there were two things that started working for us. And I'm the type of person who likes to experiment. I constantly run new ideas and think of new ways to reach our audiences. And I'll go into details, but this is where I discovered the power of posting on LinkedIn and building an audience and building validation and track and sort of trust with your audience. And another thing is that's the time I developed a strategy called the industry podcast strategy. So creating a podcast that targets your customers, that also allows you to interview your customers and build a relationship with them. And I'll get into that in a minute, but that's sort of the birth of, for me, of content-led sales was Tendo. When we exited that company, I found myself for the first time in my career not knowing what I wanted to do next. And that was really hard because I was the type of entrepreneur who would go from one project to the other, usually with some overlap. So I started building Caddy Digital while I was still owning and operating Stinson. Started building TendoPay while I was still owning and more or less operating Caddy Digital, although it was very optimized and running on its own. But after Tendo, because the sale was kind of abrupt and I hadn't expected to sell so early, I didn't know what else to do. The only thing I knew what to do was to create content. And I was in Asia. I was very passionate about entrepreneurship. And so I started posting daily on LinkedIn and building an audience. And just all I did was sharing my experiences as a founder, the ups and downs, tips and tricks for growth and market. And I was getting a lot of traction. A lot of people were engaging with me and asking me for feedback, asking me to advise them, etc. And that's when I started, taking it to the next level and building a podcast. I figured people are interested in my very short snippets of information and engaging, and some of my posts are going viral with a few 100,000 impressions, etc. Why not do a long form version of that? And I'm a big consumer of podcasts. Things like My First Million are my sort of weekly inspirations into building stuff. And I decided I wanted to build something like My First Million, but for Southeast Asia, because I didn't find that many great podcast resources for entrepreneurs in this region. And Southeast Asia is such a niche in terms of, the types of businesses that work, the strategies that work, the stories. I wanted to bring that to life. So I built a podcast and started sort of interviewing founders in the region. And because I was getting so many requests for people asking for advice on growth, I decided to monetize on that. And what I did is I built a sort of founder program where you join and get access to me for a few hours a week, and I would sort of customize playbooks with you depending on sort of the level of engagement you wanted with me. And so again, I realized content is so powerful because I didn't do anything else than put out content on LinkedIn and do the podcast, and all the leads I was getting and all the sales I was getting were through that content. And actually, one of the one of the opportunities that came out of this podcast and LinkedIn strategy was me being hired by one of my good friends, an old friend that I had met in Manila, Caleb, who had this idea to spin out a product that he had built for his DevOps agency in San Francisco, in a space that I knew nothing about, which is Kubernetes. And he just asked me for a go-to-market strategy to build a SaaS out of an existing product that he had. So I built this strategy for him, and long story short, a couple of weeks later, he called me up and said he'd love for me to be a co-founder in this project. And after doing due diligence and after reaching out to Suken and Brian for sort of not committed to, but told me that if I was to build this product, they would most likely back me, and there was a lot of opportunity in the space. And so that was sort of the birth of CubeGrades. Back in December, the idea came together, and we got in the iterative program in late January, early February of this year. So that's my story in a nutshell. And I hope that wasn't too long, but I kind of wanted to build the foundation as to why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So now diving into content-led sales, there are very important things to do, and you can't just spray and pray and build content and hope that it's going to generate income and opportunities for your startup. One thing that I spent a lot of time on, and I'm still doing, 8 months into this CubeGrade product, is really knowing who my ICP is, my ideal customer profile. And that, most startups think they know who they're servicing, but it is really something that you're going to iterate on and learn uh, throughout conversations that you're going to have with potential clients, because it's not something that's completely fixed, and it's not something that you can fully know until you've presented your product to them and gotten feedback about it, and understanding if this is something that they would need, or if this is something that someone else in the company would need, etc. So it's something that is constantly refined, but it's something that you should spend a lot of time understanding. Once you've figured out your ICP, you want to kind of find out where your ICP lives. And I don't mean finding out their addresses and trying to stalk them. I mean lives online. And to give you an example, if you're in a B2B startup, most likely your ICP will live on LinkedIn. So that's a good place to start. But if you're in certain niches, your ICP might live in more niche communities as well. So a good place to kind of find your ICP will be Reddit, subreddits. In our case, we're targeting developers. So there are a variety of places where developers live, and we'll find those communities. We'll be on X, things like that. And once you've identified where your ICP lives, what you're going to want to do is provide value. And again, this is kind of a weird strategy when you think about it, because if you're in sales, all you want to do is sell, and hopefully like someone will buy it. But with the content-led sales
Bye.
strategy,
I have vote.
oh, sorry, someone's unmuted there. When you're doing a content-led strategy, all you want to do is provide value. What's that going to do is basically providing value is going to help you build trust, build authority, and ultimately, whether or not you're going to go out and reach out to people or they're going to reach out to you, you'll have sort of that trust and that authority in order to build a relationship and to have meaningful conversations that do not feel like straight sort of cold sale. And that'll be super handy when you get into it. But I'll go into more detail in a minute. And in order to provide value, what that means is whether you're going to post on LinkedIn, post on X, post on Reddit, build a podcast potentially, you're going to have to come up with ideas of what to post. In my personal day to day, I take notes on every single client conversation I have, customer call, internal meetings we have, things that pop in my mind. I just kind of keep track of ideas and then try to turn them into pieces of content. And again, I'll give you tips on how to do that. The idea is more the process, capturing idea, turning them into content. And then once that content is out, engaging with people who are reacting to your content. So whether that's comments, likes, shares, etc., because those interaction will essentially define who is a warm potential lead for you. It doesn't mean that every single person that engages with your content will be a good lead, but once you've filtered out your ICP and you start a direct message conversation, that person will already be willing to talk to you, whether you knew them before or not. You've already got to weigh in, just even saying thank you for engaging with my content, or trying to provide additional value based on the content they engage with. And there are so many tools for that, and I'll kind of go into those tools in a minute. But you kind of see how just knowing your customers, knowing where they live, and providing value gives you a way into talking with them and having a meaningful rapport or relationship or a conversation with them that you can then later on turn into sales. And it may feel like, this seems like a lot of work. Is it really worth it? Well, I can tell you one thing is when you're building from 0 to 1 million, you're going to want to do things that don't necessarily scale. And you're not going to want to do things like, spending $100,000 on advertising when you don't really know what you're advertising and who you're advertising to and what your funnels are, etc. So spending a few hours every day going through something like this will have so much more value into bringing your first few customers that'll take you kind of to the first level of your startup. Now, what does content-led sales actually look like? I kind of talked about it in essence, but this is the overview. Is you start with creating content, and in our case, LinkedIn, Reddit, X, and a podcast is where we do it. We look for engagement, and again, likes, comments, and sometimes people DM us or DM me directly, and use that engagement to then create a sort of lead nurturing sequence where people who've engaged with you and that fit within your ICP become the only people you care about in the world. And that if that means DMing them or keeping them updated through newsletters, providing them sequences of different pieces of information. Again, I'll give you details about that in a few slides, or even calling them if you feel there's an opportunity. That nurturing of those people that already know you and to some degree like you is where you would want to spend most of your focus. Oh, I forgot to edit this slide. Okay. Anyways, and that nurturing is what will lead to sales. And you can completely ignore this. I forgot to edit the first circle. This should just say sales, and whatever your sales process is, you just want to use your nurturing to convert basically. So in B2B sales, especially in our case, we're doing enterprise sales. The nurturing and the sort of sales cycle can take 6 to 12 months. And so our process is to constantly reevaluate the engagement of our nurturing sequences. Are they being responsive? Are they responding better to this or this type of content? Did they drop off? Do we need to re-engage them with something else, etc.? That's basically the whole idea with nurturing. But another beauty with content is that whether it's a LinkedIn post or a Reddit post or a podcast, that content becomes evergreen as well. And what evergreen means is that, if you didn't get direct engagements with it, as soon as you posted, which most of the momentum happens usually within the first few hours or the first few days, that content is still out there. So whether someone will see your podcast 6 months from now and potentially start engaging, or kind of think of you for a certain item or a certain service that you're selling, or that a lead who's at sort of the nurturing sales cycle, or a stage of your cycle, want to do a due diligence on you and runs a search on you, and then happens to find your podcast or happens to find your Reddit post, that will add credibility to the sales cycle. And so all of this content, whether it directly affected this sort of a stage of the sequence, the engagement, nurturing, sale, or it's being used as a due diligence on you, or it just brings new traffic down the road, the fact that content is evergreen just means it's so much more powerful than a single email outbound campaign or a single ad campaign. It just has so much more power, and it's pretty much everlasting. Now, why does content-led marketing, or content-led sale work? Is because people buy from people, not brands. And I'm going to explain what that means. But essentially, when you look at the LinkedIns or the Twitter profile of major brands like Microsoft or Tesla, and you kind of compare that with the social profiles of their founders, you can see that usually there's a 10 to 1 or 100 to 1 follower ratio compared to between the founder and the brand, just because people don't really care what brands have to say. If they trust a brand, they might buy it. But if they're still sort of on the fence about buying a product, they'll be curious what the founder has to say. They'll sort of connect better with a human. That's why whenever Elon Musk says something, people will react positively or negatively, but at least they'll get a reaction. When Tesla posts something, unless you're a Tesla customer, most people won't care. So people buy from people because you just connect better with a human. You're able to trust a human more than a brand. That's just human psychology. And you can build authenticity by showing, who you are as a founder, what you believe in, what your vision is. People will just connect better to that. They'll just resonate much better to you. So what does it look like in practice? And this is an example for CubeGrade. This first one that you're seeing on the left is basically how we, for example, use Reddit to engage our community, to build traction, to get visibility, to build trust, etc. So as you can imagine, we're selling to DevOps engineers. DevOps engineers are usually some of the most sort of arrogant and proud people that you'll meet because they are literally experts in what they do. They've been doing it for a while. They know their thing inside out. So if you want to get through to them and be able to sort of validate your idea or sort of build visibility with them, you're going to have to bring value to them. And so what we do is we post content that is sort of related to our space, but not necessarily related to our product. And as you can see, just this piece of content had nothing to do with KubeGrade specifically. And you don't even know what KubeGrade is, but what I'm saying is like, this was more about Kubernetes in general versus talking about our product. And we got 160,000 views, bunch of engagement, brought some karma, etc. And just from that, our name was out there. People were starting to engage. And whenever we saw fit in our engagement, we could, for example, start positioning our product or at least start a conversation and maybe take the conversation away from the comment section and into DMs. But just content alone brought us so much visibility. The same goes for the next big wave. So here you see Ryan, who's one of the general partners at Iterative, and myself doing a podcast. And this was during our last founder retreat in Bali last year. And so, this next big wave podcast was literally just me talking with other founders about stories, about experiences. I didn't really have to rehearse. I didn't have to do anything but just bring a couple iPhones and a couple microphones, edit very minimally, because especially using some of the tools that, again, I'll show you in a minute. I really just sat there and talked with someone and had a bunch of different views. In this case, I had managed to grow the channel to 4,000 subscribers, etc. And a lot of leads were coming directly by someone, either getting value and being grateful for getting the value, or someone having a follow-up question that I could then, maybe turn into a customer, or at least turn into someone who would be subscribed or following my LinkedIn, and just kind of going through the funnel of potentially working with me, and if not, at least getting some of the value that I'm providing. And similarly, LinkedIn is sort of my bread and butter. And again, I mentioned to you that finding your ICP is tough, finding your brand voice is tough. For KubeGrade, I still haven't even validated completely, and I haven't gone all out on it because this is a completely new space for me. When I was focused on just selling to entrepreneurs and providing value to entrepreneurs, that's something that I knew inside out, and I was able to provide content day in, day out. But now that we're moving into Kubernetes and talking to DevOps, I'm still refining it, so I haven't gone all out. But you can kind of see that all I have to do is sort of post photos and value and insights into my day-to-day as a founder. And this provides a ton of impressions, a ton of engagement, even here, 110,000 impressions. I'm not reinventing the wheel, right? I'm just talking about my life as a founder, or about certain problems we're tackling, or openly talking about certain things we're building in KubeGrade, and kind of asking for feedback from the community. And from that, I'm generating a ton of visibility, because if you're trying to pay for impressions or clicks on LinkedIn, if anyone of you has done it, that getting 110,000 impressions on LinkedIn would be super expensive. Well, all of this is free. All it takes is my time and, sort of thinking of ideas that to post, and just trial and error, and we get there essentially. But as I was saying, like, one of the keys is figuring out what to talk about. And I think as entrepreneurs, we have at least one thing going for us, is that we're building day in, day out, we're experimenting. And so building in public is literally your roadmap to creating content. If you have no other idea, or if you don't feel like you're an expert enough or anything like that, just building in public is great, because you have constant flow of things to talk about, like whatever you did today. Like, oh, I came up with a new strategy to reach out to my customers, or I had a great call with an investor, or, oh, I'm A/B testing these two features. What do you guys think? You have a ton of content sources. On top of that, you get early feedback from your potential clients. You start building a community, and you start building a pipeline. So building in public as a founder is probably the best thing out there. And I'm still not an expert at it, but I know that when I do stuff that is related to building in public, I get all of this value, and it's essentially free. Like I just spend some time writing. And again, I'm not a writer. I'm not an amazing writer. I'm just, good at learning from the best and emulating, and now using tools. And I've just like you guys, I'm a big fan of AI. I think AI should be used wisely, but it should definitely be used. As a matter of fact, in our startup, we never hire anyone who is not sort of AI, if not AI proficient, at least they are AI curious and open to using AI. Because our idea is that every employee in this day and age should be able to 10x their productivity versus employees 10 years ago. And so I've tried and tested every single tool you can imagine for building content, especially on LinkedIn. And right now, for the last few months, I've been using Stanley. So Stanley is a sort of a derivative tool of Stan Store. If you guys know the story of Stan Store, they're kind of like a link tree. And so they came up with this AI bot that would essentially scan your LinkedIn, all your previous history on LinkedIn. So if you had some, it'll help. If not, it also scans all of your sort of in your niche, all of the top voices and all of the sort of prominent figures in your space, and kind of learn what resonates with the audience, what are their best posts, and it really learns how to best build or craft posts for your specific audience. It also identifies trends in your industry or on LinkedIn, what works, what doesn't. And then you can kind of engage with it to get daily ideas about what to write. So in my case, I already had a lot of sort of experience that or a lot of content out there that they could learn from. But what I did on top is I trained this agent with my personal RAG. So I've built sort of a database of every single piece of content I've ever written, every podcast I've ever created, every call that I've had that didn't have sensitive information. I've built a database of basically a duplicate, like a clone of myself. And I was able to feed that information into Stanley. And then now, whether I'm completely like out of ideas or I have some ideas, I sort of engage with Stanley in a very basic chat interface, and I say, "Hey, I had this idea. So I tried fundraising, and I realized that VCs in Southeast Asia were looking at my decks a completely different way than when I talk to VCs in the US. These are the different parameters that I realized. Can you help me craft an interesting article or post about that?" It will create something like this. This is completely AI generated, this article. And you can see like all I did is basically I said, in this case, I was talking about my experience or my background, et cetera, et cetera. And I got 5,000 impressions, a bunch of likes, and a bunch of DMs and opportunities that I can reach out to. And all I did is spend 5-10 minutes engaging with this chatbot. If I have zero ideas, sometimes I just say, "Hey, what's going on in DevOps this week? Can you help me come up with 5 ideas to write about?" And it'll come up with these ideas. It's obviously connected into LLMs that have live access to sort of browsing and live information. So it's really, really accurate. So if you're kind of the type of person who feels like they're not writing on LinkedIn because they don't have a great writing style or they don't know what to write about, I highly recommend you give it a try. I put a little QR so you can find it easily here. If you haven't scanned it by now, I'll give you 1 second. Go. Okay. So another thing that I've been doing, which has worked well, and it's also something that I'm trying to optimize for Kubernetes and KubeGrade, is podcasting. So I told you that at TechnoPay, that's where I created this sort of industry podcast playbook. And it was such a success that I applied it to my own business when I built Next Big Wave. And I'm now applying it to KubeGrade. And this is a playbook that I've actually taught to all of the students in the Next Big Wave, and that I've also taught to a bunch of different people. I've talked about it at different iterative events, etc. It's really, really strong. So the premise here is that when you're talking to a specific ICP, you're getting rejected, 9 times out of 10 if you're lucky, probably a lot more. But everyone has an ego. And if you can stroke that ego, you're much more likely to be able to talk to them and get them on a call. And that's where the podcast comes in. So when we were at TendoPay, we were targeting payroll managers and HR managers at sort of mid to large size companies in the Philippines. And what I did is I created a podcast called I forget what it was called, but it was a completely irrelevant name, like HR practitioner of the Philippines. Honestly forgot what it was. It was 5, 6 years ago now that I started it. But the idea was, let's just create a podcast that talks about the trends in HR, and get people who are experts on the podcast to share their experience. And the results were insane. Like our response rate went from like 5% to 40%. And we were getting a ton of people interested on being on this podcast. And at first, I was running this podcast because I thought, okay, I'm one of the founders. They're going to want to talk to a founder. So I would get them on a call for 30 to 45 minutes. I would ask them a set of questions that I just had come up with, and it just guided the conversation. Nothing really fancy. All I cared about at that point was not really the podcast, but getting them on a call, building a relationship with them, and then ultimately, kind of bringing TendoPay into the conversation and potentially getting them to see a demo. And that worked out really, really well. So in the end, what I did, I scaled it up and I got all of our sales team to kind of run their own mini podcast so they could run as many episodes as they wanted. At the end of the day, it was just a Zoom call that we recorded and then we would just upload to YouTube. We never expected sort of downstream impact from people watching the podcast. All we cared about at that point, and this is something that changed in my mind, but at that point, we just wanted people on a call to feel like, oh, I'm part of this podcast. They really value me. We're getting FaceTime, and bang, at the end we say, hey, by the way, we're at TendoPay. This is what we do. Would you like to kind of get a demo? And it worked really, really well. So when I went on my own with Next Big Wave, I realized that this podcast strategy would be great. And at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to sell or what I wanted to do, but I knew that if I built rapport with a bunch of founders, I could potentially meet my next co-founder or find ideas of businesses to build, or potentially get spotted or poached or whatever by a startup or potentially by investors. And that worked out really well. I decided to build a program for founders, and a lot of the founders on my program came from these 1 hour conversations on a podcast. I also got approached by a bunch of different VCs to build different startups. And so it really had the exact effect that I had hoped. In this case, I put a lot more effort because I realized from my first experience that, quality of podcasts and quality of editing and all that stuff could have sort of downstream effects where I wouldn't necessarily get the value from the conversation I had and get the sale immediately, but potentially someone who would gain value from watching the podcast, if it was valuable enough, would want to work with me or would generate opportunities. So at that point, I started investing a lot more in quality of audio and video and things like that. And that's why I started using a tool called Riverside. So if you don't know Riverside, I think the URL is riverside.fm. Riverside is a great tool. First of all, it records locally so that both of you are recording in the highest quality, and then it's uploading to the cloud. But it also allows you to do a bunch of editing, all sorts of modification directly in this. So if you're not a strong editor, this is the perfect tool. It also allows you to create a bunch of shorts, etc. So it's a great tool, super cost efficient. And so that's what I used for Next Big Wave, and that I'm starting to use for CubeGrade as well. So podcast strategy, I 100% recommend. LinkedIn, 100% recommend, regardless of what you're doing. If you're doing B2B, those two should be a priority. So another thing is, I talked about nurturing. So starting a conversation with your leads is just as important as putting out the content, because if you just put out the content and then you ignore engagement and don't start conversation, you're just wasting your time. So once again, as you start scaling and you're starting to get a lot of engagement and things like that, you can't always do everything manually. So I said do things that don't scale, but when there's an opportunity to do things that scale, and leveraging AI tools and things like that, you might as well want to do that. And so I'm using a tool called SalesMind AI. What I really like about this one compared to any other sort of LinkedIn tool that I've used is it kind of automatically converses with your leads. So in this case, I can define that, hey, anyone that engages with my post and you've kind of made sure that they fit my ICP, start a conversation with them and start talking about maybe the post and then start engaging based on their profile and things like that. And it completely analyzes my voice based on all my previous conversations on LinkedIn. I'm able to kind of provide a bunch of different parameters for my ICP, whether I self-input them or it picks them up from my website and all sorts of documents I provided. And I can provide, different types of context. So I can provide information about all the different products, the features that I have. I provided it a full objection handling playbook. And then it goes and it fully autonomously DM conversations with my prospects. So these are two examples in the last couple of weeks that I had where I never ever opened these DMs and I got calls booked. And this guy was from Ernst and Young, this guy's from Oracle, so massive enterprise potential clients. And I'm always refining the prompting and things like that, but I literally never opened these DMs and I got meetings. So these are the kind of tools that are amazing, especially if you tell the tool to only talk to people who've engaged with your post and then you refine the ICPs. I've also tried this tool. This is a parallel, but I've also tried full outreach with this tool and also getting good results. So, if you're in the game of using LinkedIn for your messaging, this is another tool that I'm using. I also put a QR because I don't know if their URL is super straightforward, but go ahead and take a look at it. I don't know if they have a free trial or whatnot, but this is now the tool that I swear by. And again, I've tried every LinkedIn automation tool from Meet Alfred to Taplio to La Growth Machine. I've really tried them all, and this is now the one I swear by. Sorry, my voice is getting a little raspy. And then, I mentioned opening the conversation, but now that the conversation's open, I don't always get lucky and get meetings booked automatically. Nurturing is obviously a huge part of the sales process. And one thing that I've realized when I speak to founders is that they know about nurturing. They know that in their CRM, they should have sort of reminders of talking to people. What they don't really know is what to talk about. What does nurturing actually look like? How can you nurture? And to me, I have this list of things that I like to do. And it's super straightforward. I mean, depending on where you are in your company, you may not have all of them, but you certainly have one, or at least you can come up with one and then build on top of that. And just like the idea is to constantly provide value without hoping in anything in return. And just being top of mind, especially when it's specific to your product. And for me, that's what nurturing means, is just being top of mind, being helpful, not being invasive. You can always ask, having a CTA is important and saying, hey, would you want to do a demo, or would you want to learn more? These are things that you can do, but they're not invasive. Like, you've provided value. Now all you ask is if you can, get a bit of their time. So things that I like to share are usually case studies, but of course, to get a case study, that means you need a client. Testimonial, same thing. You're going to need testimonial or clients before you can get them. But things like educational guidebooks, ROI calculators, personalized video walkthroughs of your app. Again, things that don't necessarily scale, but if you take the time to do it, you usually get a really good response. These are things that I like to use constantly. This is like my top 6 of things that I use. And it can be like nurturing. It can be via direct messaging, but it can also be things like newsletters. We're really big on using a newsletter to nurture, because newsletters are things that your leads have opted in, whether they opted in from your website or from a lead magnet or from a paid source. Newsletters are super powerful because people agree to read them. And if you do your newsletters well, you should have an open rate of like 50-60%, which is huge. So we use Beehive for our newsletters, and we're getting really good results from that. You can obviously use a bunch of different emailing tools or LinkedIn tools if you're doing any of the following. Another thing that has been really good for nurturing, and it's also something that we're now exploring in terms of content upstream, is creating webinars. So initially, webinars we were creating, we were only sending to people who we had engaged with, and we felt like they were interested, but they didn't want to have a direct conversation. So, jumping on a webinar is less invasive, you don't commit as much. So we were using for that, but now we're realizing that really, really strong upstream as well. And it can also be used as an evergreen strategy. And that's why we're now looking at Ever Webinar as our tool, because basically what it does is, and this is a complete playbook that I'm working on separately, but essentially Ever Webinar, it allows you to create webinars that look like they're happening live with a bunch of engagement and a bunch of visitors, and your ability to kind of answer Q&As as if it's live. But these are all things that are actually not live and deferred and evergreen. And people can just join them and feel like they're in a live webinar while this is a completely recorded event. And you can use it as an evergreen piece of content, super valuable to use upstream. So that's basically the tools that I use day to day. And one thing I want to leave you with is, and it's something that I might have started with, but I kind of like to leave on that note is, if you're selling and if you're a founder selling and you're selling your baby, one thing that I've noticed is most people are really, really scared of sales because, they don't mind doing the work, they don't mind hustling, but they're just really, really scared of rejection. And that's, human nature. When you're building something and someone tells you, "Oh, I don't need it," or "It's useless," or why are you building this? You're wasting your time. That really hurts our ego. But the thing about sales is, unless you're really building something completely useless, but I highly doubt any of you are, it's just a numbers game. So most people will either not necessarily need it now, or maybe they'll never need it, or maybe they're in a bad mood. But, in a numbers game like sales, you're going to get X amount of no's for every yes you get. And usually that could be, nine no's for one yes if you're lucky, could be 99 no's for one yes if you're unlucky. And to be honest, in my case, we're around that number, 99 no's for one yes. And the best way to kind of take that and be productive with it is associating a value to a no. And what that means is, in my case, for example, I'm selling to enterprises, and the value of a contract for us is around $100,000 a year. And so the LTV could be around 300,000. And so if I take that into consideration and I say, well, every node for every 99 node that I get one yes, and that yes is worth $300,000. That means that every no is going to be worth a fraction of that. And in our case, let's say 100,000. So 100,000 for a yes and 99 no's to get a yes. That means that every no is technically worth $1,000, because every time someone says no, I'm getting closer to a yes. And so instead of, taking no's as something negative, just take it as part of your process and say, "Hey, I just got a no. I just made $1,000. That's amazing. And tomorrow I'll do another no or a couple other no's, and I'll make another couple $1,000." So valuing no's as a dollar value versus just taking it as negative feedback is the best way to proceed. And that's the way I live by. And it's literally written on a post-it under my screen. Each no is worth X. And so that's kind of like my final note. And I think we'll open up to Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Tim. That was really good. We got some nice emojis coming in. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. We have actually quite a few questions, but folks, it is 6, we're pretty close 7 p.m. So
Oh, damn, I didn't realize I went over so bad. You
no
should have
worries.
let me know.
I did, Tim. I sent you a
Oh my
DM.
God.
Um,
Sorry.
but don't worry about it, guys. Because for questions that we don't get to, Tim, what I'm gonna do is
Yeah,
I'm
give them
gonna,
my email or
yeah,
whatever. I'm happy
we're
to
gonna
answer.
Yeah, we're gonna send you guys Tim's email. We're gonna compile the questions, send it over to Tim, and then he can get back to you guys as well. Um, so, but we still have a bit of time, so let's get through some of them.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna quickly go through first one. Solo founder building a B2B2C product, passionate about building, but creating content and videos bores me. But I have to do it. How to overcome it?
Well, first of all, there's a variety of different tools that should help you. So, boring is a mindset. If you're bored about creating content about your product, maybe you're you're not as passionate about the product as you thought. Because if you're using a tool like Stanley, for example, to generate content, and all you have to feed it is, just a few guidelines about the content types, or for example, just say, hey, today I worked on XYZ. Can you help me craft a post about that? And it'll help you do it. Like you literally just have to work for a couple minutes and get very decent pieces of content. So I think boredom in terms of writing the full thing, I completely understand. But if all you have to do is a bit of prompting and you get really good content that performs, I think you should be okay. The videos is a different thing, and it's very, very powerful, but you definitely have to be passionate enough about your space and passionate enough about talking with peers to do the video. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful at it. So maybe in that case, if you really don't feel like talking to potential clients, either find someone like a co-founder or a salesperson who is willing and eager to do so, because sales ultimately will require you to kind of engage with your potential clients, especially if you're doing enterprise sales. If you're doing sort of low ticket B2B sales, you might not need to do it. In this case, for me, this podcast strategy is really relevant if you're doing high ticket items and sales cycles are long. If you're doing, sort of cheap SaaS, it might not be relevant, but the content will still be relevant nonetheless, like the actual content posts and not the videos.
Nice. Okay, next question. What was your strategy to build your sales team in Asia?
Trial and error. I mean, the sales team we built at TendoPay, we spent a lot of time finding the first few people, but when we started scaling from a team of 2 salespeople to a team of 30, it was a lot of, hire fast, fire fast in a way. It's all result based. So we were able to kind of track the number of engagements they were having daily and comparing them against other team members in the team, and sort of seeing who was more eager, who was willing to kind of go over and above in terms of the number of outreaches, the number of calls, the number of meetings obtained, and make sure that we keep track of all of these instances and quickly sort of move on from the person if they don't hit them or exceed them. But in terms of like how we hired them, all LinkedIn, and we were compensating a little bit above average just to see if we could attract better talent. But that didn't all, like I said, it didn't always work. So usually we would hire 3 people and fire one person, and kind of iterate like that.
Okay. Next question is from Joe. When you create content, how do you adjust your narrative so your competitors can copy you? I think I saw this in the chat as well. Like some people,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's always going to be that question. So if you have some extremely sort of strict IP or very confidential stuff, you don't want to share that. But most startups don't operate with such IP. So the same people who ask for NDAs from investors and who are scared of their competitors stealing their stuff, trust me, the value is not necessarily in your IP, but in your go-to-market. So if you execute go-to-market well, and if you're fast enough, your competitors are not just they're not gonna focus on trying to copy your features or whatever sort of IP you have. They're gonna be trying to beat you and go to market. And most of the time, competitors see stuff and they don't necessarily agree with you. It's like just because you came up with something doesn't mean your competitor hasn't thought of it. They're just building their roadmap based on their assumptions. So I've always shared everything, unless it was sensitive information, and never had an issue with someone copying. If anything, I've engaged with competitors and kind of shared notes on what we were doing. The world and the global market is so big that you're gonna, you're not operating at such a level, at least right now, where you're fighting over the last few percent of market share. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think the value you gain from sharing and getting exposure from potential clients and investors is a lot higher than what you're losing from potential competitors trying to copy you.
Nice. That's a good framing. Okay, we are a little bit over 7, but I think we can go through maybe 3 more questions. And then the
Sure.
rest, we will email it over to Tim.
Mm.
Okay, my B2C startup has been growing organically, but the speed is too slow and it isn't up to expectation. Any advice?
Yeah, B2C is different because you need, huge volumes usually to be to grow and to be profitable and to find your unit economics. So content, if you're doing B2C content for B2C, you're gonna have to scale. You're gonna have to become a popular channel. You're gonna have to become a really popular writer. Like just 1 or 2 opportunities a day or a week are not gonna cut it. So for me, content should not be the main strategy when you're doing B2C. It should kind of be just an additional strategy. I wouldn't focus exclusively on content to build a B2B, a B2C startup, unfortunately.
Okay, last 2 questions. In a service-heavy B2B model that's already showing traction, what's the best way to identify and codify repeatable growth levers to scale towards 1 million?
Wow, that question hurt my head. I'm trying to reread it. And it says, that's already showing traction. What's the best way to identify and codify repeatable growth levers? So I'm trying to understand what you're really after in this question. So whoever posted that, if you could email me, I'd have a better answer because I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to understand. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. We will drop Tim's email. I'll send it
Yeah,
to you
yes, please do.
after the event.
Yeah.
This is from Chris. How do you handle the LinkedIn algorithm? Posts are relevant to about 25% of my network, so most ignore them, and the algorithm seems to punish that.
Yeah, so the algorithm is finicky, and most of us, especially if you've evolved throughout your career, not all of our connections are related to what we're doing now. In my case, a very small fraction of people that follow me are in the DevOps world. So I totally understand where you're coming from. The thing is, LinkedIn will start showing your content to people as it see fit. It doesn't always show to people who follow you. So if you do quality content and you're consistent with it, ultimately the algorithm will find the right fit for your audience. It won't necessarily penalize you if some of your own audience ignores you. The algorithm and LinkedIn itself is, they understand that your whole network is not necessarily relevant to your current role. And so they take that into consideration. It's not a penalty. I would advise you to keep being consistent, keep providing value, because if you provide valuable content, it won't be ignored by the LinkedIn algorithm for too long.
Okay, maybe the last question, and then we will let people go because it's already 7:05. Last question. Oh, I wonder if... Oh, there we go. What are your tactics to convert people into meetings on LinkedIn? What messages do you create to reach out to potential leads that engage with your post? I think you touched on this earlier.
Yeah, I mentioned it. So just if it's someone who's engaged on your post, very basic, thanks for engaging, and then having a little bit of follow-up value about that post specifically. So, I don't know exactly what you're operating on, but let's say I posted about a new trend in Kubernetes and someone liked it. I'll just respond and say, hey, so you liked it? By the way, I also noted that this new trend was picking up. Have you guys encountered anything around that space, whatever, whatever. And I'm not expecting them to, accept a meeting immediately. What I'm hoping for is a response. Because if I get a response from that follow-up message, I know that within a two, three message sequence, I built enough rapport to be confident enough to ask them for a meeting, especially if they fit my ICP. But I would never sort of ask for a meeting just because they engaged. It's just them opening the door to me starting a conversation. And you want to treat LinkedIn as a real sort of human interaction. Let's say that, you bump it, you have a chat like exactly what we're doing here, but in person, and you have a talk, and someone approaches you and said, "Hey, thanks, that was valuable." You're not gonna be like, "Oh, cool, thanks. Do you want to set up a demo call for my product?" You're gonna be like, thanks. I really appreciate that. By the way, like, what did you think of this? Start a conversation, like at least have a two, three interaction conversation before you can say, by the way, are you guys using anyone for your Kubernetes needs? Like, I'd love to show you what we're building. That guy already is kind of bought into you, and either they'll be interested or they would feel rude not to take that call. But either way, you have a higher chance of getting a call with them rather than if you just said it in the first message.
Okay, all right, folks, we have more questions, but again, we're over time. So we're really sorry about not getting to everyone's questions, but we have recorded them. So we're gonna send it over to Tim, and if you want to reach out to Tim on your own to ask questions, I'm just dropped his email here. Big thank you to everyone who came to our event and staying until so late. Big thank you to Tim for doing this
Thank you.
masterclass.
Thank you.
Where can people find you besides the email?
LinkedIn, Tim Grassin, so exactly my name here. And that's where I'm the most sort of engaging and engaged. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me. I think those are the best way to reach out.
All right, great. All right, thank you everyone for coming. I will be sending you guys information via email, so keep a lookout for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.